The novel takes place in a fictitious city similar to Eugene in size, called Lakeview, Michigan. And a former resident of Lakeview, Michigan is dying. It is a town in trouble. And one of its former citizens is going to move back. And this woman is bringing with her the $1 billion that she has won as a lottery winner. And she is determined to save her town. One of the things that she is determined to save is the children in juvenile detention, because as many of us know, juvenile detention is filled with brilliant young people who just don't belong. So she has found a way. She's created a secret school for these students. Well, word gets around, and this particular novel focuses on one young lady, 15-year-old Story Black. And Story has decided, seeing her situation in her high school in Lakeview, that she needs to get into this secret school. And so she decides that the only way to do that, of course, is to break the law and wind up in jail. And so she does that. And she is brilliant, and she is granted an interview for the secret school. And the chapter that I'm going to share with you is that interview. She meets up with two women, and this is how her interview goes. Give me a second. This is called the convincing hour. What's your name? Story Black. How old are you? 15, 16 soon. And why are you in jail? I held up a convenience store with another girl. The woman interviewing me called herself Margaret, but I knew that wasn't her real name. She'd looked slightly to the right when she introduced herself, like she was scrolling through her contacts, picking a name just for this interview. She glanced at an open folder in front of her, confirming what I said was true. While she debated her next question, I listened to the muffled kabooms of the hallway door clanging shut every time someone entered or exited the visitor's room. I recrossed my legs and accidentally kicked one of the table's plastic legs. Sorry. No worries, Margaret replied without looking up from her notes. First-time offender. Sounds like you might have avoided detention, but you went before Judge Schoenfeld. Yeah. I could tell from her tone that she didn't approve of Judge Dick. Decent grades in school, although teachers say you could do better. It says your probation officer is Charity Aguilera. She paused and added, great name for a PO. Yeah, she always makes fun of her name. Margaret scanned the PO log that Charity filled out when we met each week. Says you're doing great. I nodded and my knee bumped the table leg again. Sorry. Margaret looked up and smiled warmly. It's okay. Take a deep breath. These rooms are the size of a shoebox. She wasn't kidding. The tiny interview room was barely big enough for two people, and we had three, counting the videographer, plus a camera on a tripod. I pictured myself frozen, so I'd stop flailing around like a baby. Wilkie, a different kid who'd been interviewed a few weeks before, told me to chill while I waited for each question. He thought his nervousness fucked up his chances. Margaret's brown eyes sucked me in. What's the worst part about being in jail, Story? The little pencils, I said automatically. Why? I sat up straight. They're symbols, like symbols in literature. Outside in regular school, nobody ever keeps a short pencil. You throw it out and you get a new one from the teacher. But in here, it's the best we'll get. And it's really hard to write with a tiny pencil. My hand starts to cramp and I like to write. Sometimes I think about the teachers sitting at home, breaking perfectly good pencils in half while they watch their favorite TV shows. Then before they go to bed, they sharpen them down to practically nothing. Such a waste. You understand why the detention teachers only supply short pencils, right? It's a safety issue. Yeah, I get it. Nobody's going to shank somebody with a tiny stub. Her eyes narrowed as if she were studying a speck. Why do you do that? Do what? You talk about literary symbols like a college professor, and then you revert to colloquial street language. Why? I couldn't hide my surprise. Well, there's a way to act in here, a way to talk so you don't sound stuck up and people don't give you shit. That's really how it is in life. I shrugged. I don't know. When I looked up, she was staring at me. That's not true. We've been watching you, Story. There isn't much you don't know. She smiled and I felt a tug at the corners of my mouth. She was pretty. Her skin was much darker than mine and she had soft brown eyes and raven-colored hair. She was tall, so tall she had to sit sideways because her legs wouldn't fit under the cheap plastic table with the high heels she wore. The red leather pumps matched the silk blouse underneath her black suit. She probably ate at trendy restaurants and sipped champagne with a group of female friends who possessed equally fabulous smiles. Her stylus flew across the face of her tablet as she took notes about me. I wanted to say something unique to her, something that would make me stand out so that she'd remember me. Nobody is memorable in jail. That's the point. Everybody wears the same blue drawstring pants and Vans rip-off slippers. The t-shirts are different colors depending on your behavior. I wore red, and that meant I'd never gotten a strike from a CO. Margaret talked to a lot of kids, and I imagine they rolled into one crazy-ass juvenile delinquent with a really sad wardrobe. I glanced at the camera in the corner. Like the blinking green light, I needed to be on. My hands sweated and I rubbed them on my thighs while I waited for the next question. My leg bounced nervously and I pressed my heels to the floor to stop it. I didn't want to bump the table again. Margaret looked over her shoulder at the videographer crammed in the corner playing with her phone. She was Margaret's opposite, short, blonde, and white. Her hair flipped to one side and scrambled in a few directions from the product she'd applied. She wore a t-shirt underneath an old corduroy jacket with leather patches on the elbows, and the cuffs of her jeans were tucked into sleek black boots. Sleek was definitely the right word for her. She'd arrived first and stuck a microphone on my t-shirt to test it. Are you nervous? She'd asked. Yeah. What kind of questions will she ask me? She leaned closer and glanced around the room as if she was about to betray a secret. Then she said, you'll be asked to recite the Declaration of Independence. My eyes bugged out. Seriously? She laughed and shook her head. I let out a deep breath and laughed with her. I'm glad you're kidding. I know it's an important document to the founding of our country, but I couldn't recite it. George Eliot's Middlemarch stuck out of her camera bag. I really like that book, I offered. I figured it couldn't hurt to be pleasant to the camera lady. Maybe she'd put in a good word with me. What other books have you read? Everything by Jane Austen, and I love Kurt Vonnegut and Willa Cather and Mary Oliver, just lots of people. I didn't want to name the hundreds of authors I'd read and sound stuck up. She smiled and said, all great ones, just be yourself. I'm Jill. We made small talk until Margaret arrived, and then Jill snuck behind the camera and turned it on. I stared at the light and willed myself to stop being nervous. Margaret set her tablet down again and leaned back. You have an interesting name. How did you get it? It's a long story. She chuckled. I'd love to hear it. It really would take too long to explain. I shouldn't have been born. What happened made the local newspapers, and my mother still carries the clipping from the paper around. So I'm a story. I'd never told anybody that much, but Wilkie said I needed to impress this lady if I wanted anything to happen. He called her the key to getting out of jail and out of Lakeview. Miss Sutton, my teacher, had told me to be honest and respectful. I was trying. Tell me about your family. I live with my mom now. Any brothers and sisters? No, I lived with my grandma, but she died 2 years ago and I went back to my mom. Is your father in the picture? I shook my head. She didn't write down my answer, so I could tell she already knew. It's just me and mom now that Gran's dead. She glanced at the folder. Her name was Matilda Black, right? Yes. And your mother is Patience? Yes, but she goes by Patty. Patience doesn't really fit her. I tried not to make it sound sarcastic, but I kind of snorted at the end of the comment. She grinned, but kept her eyes glued to the tablet. I waited for her to ask me about mom's 6 trips to rehab and why my home life was so screwed up, or how I'd wound up in jail, but she didn't ask those questions like the other 14 adults who'd interviewed me. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her chin on her upturned palm. Story, what are your dreams? I took a deep breath and sat up straighter. I was ready for this one. I've been thinking about different career paths and weighing my options. I'm a voracious reader, but I also enjoyed mathematics, specifically algebra. I could see myself becoming a journalist or an engineer. She nodded. Those are excellent career choices. She paused and asked, what are you passionate about? My face dropped into a frown and I looked away. I thought of every question I could imagine, but I never thought about passion. Of course, I knew what the word meant, but it wasn't like I had time to paint or sculpt or write. Surviving filled my day planner. I glanced at her razor sharp gaze. She was watching me stumble around the answer. I shook my head. I don't know. She set down the iPad and stylus and crossed her arms. She looked shocked. You can't answer the question? I should have seen this coming and planned an answer, even if it was a lie. I licked my lips, searching, thinking. I wasn't good under pressure. It's a dumb question, I spat. I'm disappointed. I glared at her, disappointed. What were you expecting? Some kind of show? Maybe I'd start reciting the Declaration of Independence for you? I glanced at Jill, but she was focused on the viewfinder. Or was I just supposed to kiss your ass and act grateful that you asked to talk to me? Is that why you're disappointed, or did I miss something? She stuck her iPad and stylus in the messenger bag. I sat back and closed my eyes. I'd screwed up and missed my chance, a chance I'd spent weeks planning for. I thought about what I'd just said. It wasn't me, it was my mom talking. Even jail couldn't keep us apart. I sunk lower in the chair and buried my face in my hands. Can I go back now? Do you mean back to the unit or back to the street? Both. Absolutely. Miss Sutton gave you too much credit. I'll need to tell her she's losing her touch. My head shot up. Miss Sutton was the best teacher I'd ever known. Every day I was struck by the irony. I had to go to jail to get a great teacher. What does she have to do with this? Who do you think recommended for the spot test? I stared at Margaret. I knew what she was doing. She was judging Miss Sutton based on my behavior. If I didn't do well in this interview, Miss Sutton would probably lose a bonus or a promotion. That's how adults worked. They were the cruelest to each other. Normally, I wouldn't care, but Miss Sutton was different from all the other adults I knew. I inhaled, visualizing the oxygen tingling my brain. Your question is irrelevant. Her eyes darted toward Jill, so I looked over at Jill too. Her finger rested on the on-off button of the video camera, but she hadn't pushed it, and the green light remained on. Margaret was waiting to see what Jill wanted to do, and not the other way around. Something was weird. Who's running this show? I asked. They looked surprised. Neither said anything, and my nervous leg bounced like crazy. I was in real trouble now. I figured out their game. Jill stepped away from the camera. You're very perceptive, Story. She slid into the chair between Margaret and me and asked, why do you suppose I would allow Margaret to ask you the questions? I thought about my earlier conversation with Jill and Middlemarch. The fact that Margaret was supposedly late. You wanted to watch me answer questions, but you wanted to talk to me before we started. I wasn't as nervous then. Exactly, she said. Margaret and Jill exchanged a nod. Margaret stepped behind the camera and Jill leaned on the table. Now let's go back. Tell me why having passion is irrelevant. How could I explain? Have you ever been to Walmart? Once or twice, but I usually try to avoid it. I'm not much for obnoxious crowds. Me neither, but it's where you shop when you don't have enough money. What does that have to do with pursuing your passions? So one day I turned into the baby aisle by accident, and these three women were there. They came from the other direction, so I could see their faces. The oldest was probably in her 50s. She's holding a can of off-brand baby food and lecturing the youngest one, who's a little older than me. She's got on these teeny tiny shorts and a string tank top. She's pretending to listen, but she's getting tired of standing there. She shifts her weight from one foot to the other and slides this toddler from her right hip to her left. I guess that it's a grandma and a granddaughter. Grandma's talking about how it's her disability check, and there's no way she's paying 80 cents more for the name brand. And every time she takes a breath, the granddaughter tries to tell her that the name brand is better for the toddler because it's organic. They're getting louder and louder, and pretty soon the kid's crying, and the girl lifts her shirt and shoves him to her breast to shut him up so they can keep fighting. What about the third woman? She's the one I noticed the most. I'm guessing she's the granddaughter's mom. 4 generations, Jill murmured. Yeah, she's leaning on the cart, not even paying attention to their fight over her head. She's there, but she isn't there. She's checked out. It's the look on her face that I remember. What did you see? At first, I thought she might be stoned, but there was a moment when the grandma said something really cruel and the mom closed her eyes like she was trying to keep it together and not scream at her own mother. Jill moved so close to me, I could smell the mint on her breath. And what do you think that meant? She's helpless. She's realized this is her life. The grandma ranted on, and the granddaughter is too young to know that her life is going to be about fighting over 80 cents day in and day out, week after week, year after year. She doesn't see it, but the mom gets it. She's completely stuck, and she's made sure that her daughter is stuck too. I think she felt bad. Jill and Margaret exchanged a glance, but I couldn't tell if they were happy or upset with my answer. What happened next? Jill said. I went 3 rows over and I saw another grandma, mom, and daughter. Only this daughter had 2 kids. So when you ask me about my dreams, that's what I see. You think that will be you, won't it? Where'd you get such an advanced vocabulary? Your teachers in school? I snorted, picturing my freshman year, Mrs. Shore, a woman who taught me nothing because she couldn't control her class. Now, it wasn't my teachers. When I was little and lived with Gran, she read the classics to me, and we always had a word of the day. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I knew a ton of words, and the teachers just kept sending me to the library during reading time. They didn't know what to do with me. I just kept checking out books from the library. Something occurred to me, and I looked at Jill quizzically. I don't get it. Get what? My grandma did a great job with me, but my mom's a mess. How come she didn't do such a great job with her? Jill glanced at Margaret again. It was like a private joke I didn't understand. I hoped I wasn't the joke. I thought I'd said something really stupid until Jill reached for my hand and clutched it. Story, you're amazing. I can't explain why your grandma did better by you than your mother, but the fact that you even recognize the significance is incredible. That's one reason why you're special. I want you to achieve your dreams. I want you to have them. I want you to achieve them. What if I told you I could make sure you never have to worry about 80 cents ever again? For a moment, I didn't breathe. My plan had worked. You really could do that? Her green eyes grew darker and she smiled like she was proud of me. Story, that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's the end of the chapter.